Good evening, everybody, and a very warm welcome to Lecture Theatre 1, to this evening's event, Navigating a Career in the Renewable Sector. So I'm delighted to welcome the panel here this evening from Source Galileo. We're joined by Fintan Whelan, who's the co-founder and director of Source Galileo, and a number of his colleagues who I'm going to pass over in a minute for Fintan to introduce. But just for myself and the business alumni team, we're delighted to have this event this evening. For you guys, it's a fabulous opportunity to learn about this really interesting, growing, there's so much to learn about this sector because it's so new, it's growing, and this evening's event is a fabulous opportunity to learn more about the renewable energy sector and the opportunities that exist within. So I'm going to pass you over to Fintan, who will introduce the panel. We're going to have a panel discussion for about 30 minutes or so, and then we're going to have an opportunity for some questions and answers at the end. So we'll go around with the mics if anyone does have any question. And then following that, we're going to go out to the main reception, the main foyer, for some drinks and food thereafter. So thank you very much for joining us, and I'll now pass you over to Fintan.
Thanks very much, Gillian. Can everyone hear me? Excellent, because we had some foostering around with the microphone earlier on. Okay, my name's Fintan Whelan. As Gillian says, I'm a co-founder of Source Galileo. I've been described as an industry veteran on the basis that I started my renewables journey before the turn of the century. I can actually say that now, 1999. This evening, we have some of my colleagues from Source Galileo. We originally had this plan so it would be only UCD alumni. But our CEO is over in Japan talking to one of our investors. And our consents manager, Julie Bowe, is unfortunately engaged in and around Leinster House today. Her role is consents manager and public affairs manager, so that means rubbing shoulders with politicians in the policy formation basis, so he couldn't be here. We have instead, we've been demonstrating some bench strength in this organisation. We have two bangers, I believe the technical term is in Irish soccer, non-UCD alumni. So we have Tom Shannon, who's a graduate engineer. He's one of the more recent recruits, a graduate of Trinity's engineering school. And we have one of my co-founders, Garrett Morrison, who's a graduate of Napier School and College in Edinburgh. He's a chartered surveyor. Brian Doherty is the real deal. He's a graduate of UCD's engineering school and an MBA from this illustrious school. And he has had a very interesting journey around renewables. And then last but not least is Gina Cassidy, our Chief Ops Officer, Social Science in UCD, and what's the master's degree you did here? I did DBS. And came into the industry from HR. So the running order is I'm going to firstly hand over to Gina to just take you through a very brief background to Source Galileo, what we do and who we are, what we're trying to achieve. And then Gina will hand back to me and I'll choreograph a series of brief illustrations of the meat of this event, which is how did we all get a start in renewables, right? And what have we done in our time, just to give you an insight and open up some windows for you if this is the career or the sector that you wish to pursue your next key steps in your career. So over to Gina first. Thank you.
So
just in terms of what we're going to cover today, Fintan's obviously already covered the team introductions. I'm going to give a brief overview alongside Garrett just in terms of Source and what we do and the geographies that we're working in and the portfolios that we have. As Fintan said, he'll, I suppose, ease out of us our kind of journeys into renewables. I think we've all had quite diverse entries into the industry, some longer than others, and then we'll do a Q&A, and obviously please feel free to ask questions, don't be shy, all the things you want to know. And then I think the reception is back out in the lobby area, so hopefully you'll join us for a glass of wine and a chat, and again, happy to answer any questions or get to meet you all individually out there. Oh, sorry, going the wrong way. So in terms of company overview, so we're obviously, Source Galileo is a developer of large-scale renewable projects in Europe, and I suppose we're focusing predominantly on Ireland, the UK and Norway. It was founded by a group of senior renewable energy professionals, so Fintan, Garrett, Torben Anderson, who is one of our founders and directors, and Kevin Lynch, who was supposed to be here today, is our CEO. So Garrett, Fintan, Torben and Garrett have all worked together in some form or another over the years, and they came together in 2020 to form Source Energy. I think I actually have a timeline on the next page. So this just gives you a timeline in terms of, I suppose, the backgrounds of the four founders. So Fintan, Torben and Peter, our head of offshore, all worked together in electricity back in the 90s, as Fintan said. And Fintan and Torben went on, Fintan to co-found Mainstream, and Torben was one of their executives for over a decade. Meanwhile, Peter and another one of our project managers, Matt, worked together at SSE, while Garrett, Fintan and Kevin worked together at Amarenco, which is a solar developer. So as I said, in 2020, the four guys founded Source Energy, and in 2021 we formed a joint venture, a JV, with a Swiss fund, Galileo Green Energy, who are backed by the Australian Superan and Morrison's Infratil and the New Zealand Super Fund as well. So that, I suppose we have a portfolio of 10 gig of predominantly offshore projects, but we do have a portfolio of onshore in the UK, which Garrett's going to talk us through in a couple of minutes. But our offshore portfolio spans across Ireland, the UK and Norway, and as I said, it's about 10 gig. Last year, you may have seen, if you've been looking at our website in advance, we took in 2 investors into our project level. So Inca, which is the investment arm of IKEA, who's obviously a familiar household name, and Kansai, which is where Kevin, as Fintan said, our CEO is at the moment, is the second largest utility in Japan. So they both joined, firstly, a consortium that we have in Norway for our Utsira and our Goliath projects, and after that, Inca came into our full Ireland and UK offshore portfolios. So very strong investors, which is great. This just gives an outline of those that I mentioned. So the first 4 are obviously Galileo's investors, and then the project investment from Kansai and Inca. So I suppose institutional and infrastructure investors with assets under management. This just outlines the geographies that I mentioned that we are. Portugal is something that we're looking at the moment, but our current portfolio, as I said, Ireland, the UK and Norway. I'm going to pass you over to Garrett, who's going to go through each of those geographies individually. If you want to pop up. Or you can use your mic.
Thank you.
It's on answer.
Thanks. Thanks, Tina. Can everybody hear me? Yeah? Okay, I'm going to start off actually with a quote, I think, which probably summarises the business in terms of Source Galileo, Source Energy. Whenever we started out in the business, we looked at the technology that was available, and our quote as a business is, we believe that the future of European energy is floating offshore wind off its western peninsula, off the west coast of the European peninsula, purely because the resource which is sitting out in the Atlantic is untapped, first of all, but it's incredible. So as I say, it's our job to be able to develop projects on that west coast which is capable of providing the power back to the European, the countries within Europe. So we talked about this earlier, and I wanted to get that in first. Thank you. You can see it here on the map, the jurisdictions or the geographies we're talking about. As an Irish company as such, we initially set out and we scoped all of the seabed around Northern Ireland and Southern Ireland, and we very quickly realised that as much as there is a lot of sea area out there, there's not a lot of areas where you can actually develop large-scale wind, given the constraints which are existing there. And what I mean by constraints, I mean shipping lanes, and I mean depths of water and conditions, etc. So we've eventually settled on 5 sites in Irish waters. You can see here one of our sites was called Malin Head, which we look on that as being both a fixed bottom and a floating foundation wind farm. Sits about 25-30 miles off the coastline to the northwest in Donegal. And again, part of the business was we were going to be able to utilise the technology which is available to us today to be able to push our sites further out from the coast, which in a way would probably hopefully avail of issues, or try to prevent issues around visual impact where people could potentially raise issues and concerns about. So Malin Head sits to the northwest of the country. We also then have appropriately named a project called Floating Cork, which is our only fully floating foundation project. It sits in the south coast. Then if you take a look to the east, we've got a project called MacLear, which sits again at about 30 miles, and there's been a lot of publicity about this area in the past, given that some of the ORES 1 projects which were awarded subsidy actually sit within this location. Again, we decided to go further out, and we pushed out into 30 kilometre distances from the coastline. And then if you take a look further south, we have 4 sites, 2 which sit in Irish waters, which we call Muirshin and Danu, and 2 which sit directly to the east, which are in UK waters, which we have renamed, should I say, Dillon and Murden. Those 4 sites are a mixture of both fixed bottom and floating foundation type projects. And the reason why you opt for a floating foundation is the water depths. You're talking probably 70-metre depths of water plus, which suit the floating foundation structure. Anything sub 70-metre depths you can probably construct using fixed foundation. If we move into UK jurisdiction, as I say, I've mentioned Dillon and I've mentioned Murden. We have another project which sits directly on the south coast of the UK. We call that Portwind, and for anybody who knows the geography, the nearest port to this project is called Portland, which is historically very well known from a construction point of view, in that it tended to provide quite a lot of the building materials for a lot of the construction for London. So we'll say some of the large London landmark buildings, such as St Paul's Cathedral, other would have actually the Portland stone would have been used for the construction of those buildings. What we have here is actually managed to secure quite a substantial grid connection for this project, which we think is actually, we're ahead of the process in terms of, with the grid connection secured, we believe we're in a strong position whenever any process comes around for awarding seabed here. So this project is actually a bit unique in that it initially started out as a project which is offshore wind, solar PV and battery storage, so a mixture of 3 technologies. We quickly, after a while, realised that the designation for the area is very much what the term AONB, which is an area of outstanding natural beauty. So to build a 500 megawatt solar farm, we would probably need about 1,000 acres of land, which very quickly we realised wasn't available to us, or isn't available to us, given the designation. It sits at the moment as a 2.1 megawatt wind farm with a 300 megawatt battery storage facility, which will support the grid when the power comes on shore. Moving east again, we also have activities in Norway. You will see the names of Utsira and Goliath. Utsira is unique in that it's the first floating offshore wind tender that Norway will be offering, will be offering, should I say. We have set up a business in Norway which has a partnership with actually a foundation provider called Odfjell. And Odfjell's history is that they provided services to the oil and gas sector, in that they designed and they built floating structures which were sent out to deep sea locations in harsh mid-ocean environments to extract oil and gas from the seabed. So using that history and using the core competencies, we believe Odfjell are capable of obviously designing structures which are suitable for floating offshore wind projects and supporting turbines. The other project which I'm going to just refer to here, which is a bit unique, is called Goliath. We call it Project Goliath, and as I say, when we talk about energy, energy is energy, whether it's going to be oil and gas or whether it's going to be coming from other sources, i.e. wind or solar. Project Goliath is actually a project that is being developed to provide, first of all, it's a 5-turbine project of 75 megawatts in size, and it'll be used to provide power to the oil and gas platform, which is Goliath, so that it's helping them to decarbonise their operations. So the power which is created will provide them with sufficient power, and any excess power created at that site will then be actually exported back to the shore to go into the Norwegian electricity grid. So we believe, just one point about Goliath, it's also a floating wind project. We believe clearly the technology there to allow us, which will be deployed at Goliath, will help us with our overall plans for the business in terms of developing floating offshore wind projects across all of the geographies we're working on. Do I go right? Or
Sorry.
Okay. In addition to the offshore activities, you'll see I'm actually based in our London office, so I look after the...
No, keep going. No, I've just knocked it off.
In addition to our offshore development wind projects, we are also developing a portfolio, a pipeline of onshore projects, we call them, of which they're made up of solar PV and battery storage. So in some cases we have standalone battery storage facilities, which in some cases they're 100 megawatts in size. What the function of those projects will be to take excess power from the grid in times where the grid isn't capable of actually being able to use the power, storing it for a period of time, and then releasing it into the grid during peak times, whether it be first thing in the morning when everyone gets up and puts their kettle on and maybe takes a shower, or maybe in the afternoon or the evening time when they come home from work. They put their kettle on the television and they cook their dinner whenever there's a demand for power in the grid. So it's a flexible source, it's a flexible technology of which obviously the grid really depends on. So across the UK in particular, we have a portfolio of roughly about 700 megawatts of projects, heavily weighted in the battery storage sector, but further south where clearly there's a better solar radiation in the UK, we have a number of projects, 4 of which we're developing. There'll be 50 megawatt size solar PV projects, of which we will require roughly 200 acres of land with landowners. In addition, again, to the solar PV, the battery storage and the offshore wind, we're also looking at developing hydrogen, not just hydrogen, but green hydrogen. The battery technology previously allows you to store electricity in times of whenever it's not required. We see the production of hydrogen in terms of, in particular, green hydrogen, which will be utilising that the power which is created potentially from our projects to feed into an electrolyser and then to create hydrogen, or green hydrogen as we call that, of which there's a huge demand, huge appetite from large industrial off-takers who are looking to decarbonise their operations. And I mean by large industrial off-takers, I mean, say, industrial metal, steel, refineries and chemical plants, etc. So we are currently, you'll find on our website, we have signed several contracts quite recently. One being what we call ERM Dolphin, which is where we actually are involved in creating, or at least designing to future create green hydrogen from offshore, purely from offshore wind. So the wind which is generated from the platform will feed an electrolyser. Instead of sending the electricity back to shore, it'll be to create green hydrogen, which will then be hopefully transported back to the end user at shore. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Gareth. There's a bit of a walk around what we're up to, where we're up to it. The thing I'd say in addition about hydrogen is it represents a strategic optionality for renewable energy projects, what they can do with the product that they make. All the time I've been in this business, we've had to hook it up to the electricity grid, and the electricity grid always lags the pace at which developers bring new generation resource on stream. So what the hydrogen option does is we don't have to sell electricity. We can make hydrogen with our electricity, store and transport that hydrogen and sell it into many different sectors. So that strategic optionality is transformational for our business. Now, there is a functioning microphone over there. So what I'm going to do first is just give you my introduction as to how I got into this sector. It actually starts in this college. I did my BCom first, and I did that in the 70s, and different jobs. I got into insurance and spent about 16 or 17 years in insurance after I graduated BCom. Did my accounting exams in the 80s, and then in the 90s I got bored with insurance, and working with actuaries, who I think are a wonderful financial discipline. They speak maths first and then maybe English, you know. But I was fascinated with their fluence in mathematics, and they knew more about mathematics than I did as a qualified accountant. And I said, that sat very uneasily with me, and I had to do something about it. So I came here and I did a master's in finance. And when I graduated, I joined EY's consulting arm and did various financial modeling, consulting works for insurance companies and banks, and anything else that came in the door that interested me. And one thing that came in the door one day was two of the founders of Airtricity, which was a very interesting early stage renewable energy business here in Ireland. And it was based on a business model of developing and operating onshore wind farms, and also supplying the electricity at a discounted ESB's rate to small businesses. And that took off like a rocket in 2000. And in '99 I worked with them on developing their first business plan, which involved developing the first financial model of the business. So my entry point was financial modeling. And it's a skill set that you see in life insurance companies and banks, anywhere where you have complex business processes or financing arrangements. Anything where there's complexity, you'll tend to need modeling. And I had some special software for that. That got me the gig. It was wonderful. 6 months later, I handed the disk with the Excel spreadsheet and the modeling software to the FD, and I said, "Yeah, my job's done here for now." And he said, "Well, would you like a different job?" So I started as corporate finance manager for Airtricity, and the CEO, who just died a few weeks ago, a guy called Eddie O'Connor, he said to me, "You did a good job on the modelling. Now there's a big capital requirement to fund this business. Go out and find it." So that set me off on what's been a white knuckle ride, roller coaster, but always interesting. I never thought actually that work could be so interesting and enjoyable. Beats insurance, hands down. So that's pretty much how I got in, and since then you find like that as you have more and more experience, you get involved in business gets sold, particularly in new frontier sectors that renewables has been. So as businesses get sold, there's new opportunities to restart and apply what you learned and make money. There's good opportunities for capital formation in early stage businesses if you're smart. And every early business needs a funding plan, and that's where the corporate finance comes in. But there's lots of different disciplines that this sector needs. Now, there's lots of ordinary or frequently encountered roles in renewable energy businesses because they are businesses. So there's an accounting function, and there's an IT function, there's a HR function. So there's lots of normal stuff going on in these businesses, but they're very engineering led, and they're very commercial. And in the nature of things, a development business, you're starting something from scratch and taking it into a stage where it has real value, and either you take it through construction or an operation, or you might sell it you might sell a piece of real estate with planning permission. A site with planning permission is not too different. So lots of analogies. But there are some specialty areas. We don't have one particular specialty represented here, but the closest we have to it maybe is Tom Shanahan. And Tom, you've been involved, if you tell the audience how you got in the door, right? But also, you've been involved on the wind resource measurement side, haven't you? You've been engaged in that, haven't you?
Yeah. So to give you guys a bit of a background as to how I kind of came across Source, I met with Fintan about a year ago for kind of an informal discussion as to, not really looking for a role per se directly, but just trying to understand what's the industry, how does everything knit together, who's who, and then about 4 months later, Fintan got in contact with me and said, we may have a graduate role, would you be interested in applying? So I just finished a master's in mechanical engineering last year. I had kind of a focus on renewable energy. I did a thesis in renewable offshore wind off the south and west coast of Ireland, and then I suppose that led to a very broad scope of what I've been doing for the past 6 months within Source. So I've been doing, as Fintan said, wind resource modelling. So for example, that means there's numerous data sets out there that will give you an approximation of how much energy is actually available within a certain area. Now, trying to quantify what the best data set might be, or what that might result in terms of an energy output, it's a matter of research. But I think, going alongside that, you have your wind resource, but a lot of the time that's not necessarily where you might only start, and Fintan will correct me on this if I'm wrong, but there's so many other constraints when you're looking for any of these sites, or for any sort of onshore or offshore energy site, and I suppose it's knitting those together is kind of what I've been looking at. It's quite interesting actually, but yes, that's kind of.
Have you done any engineering stuff?
Yeah. So I've been. I suppose the engineering that I've been doing is the skill set that engineering has given me is being able to interpret and manipulate data relatively quickly. So as I kind of joke, the question that I usually get at about 3 o'clock is like someone will send me an email being like, Tom, do you have something, do you have any time to look at this tomorrow? And you'll get kind of an idea, a small starter as to, what are the chances of this piece of hydrogen technology in this area. And then this is, I think, what's actually really interesting about it is then you spend 2-3 days, maybe a week, 2 weeks, whatever, researching this, putting sort of, a very brief technical document together, and then delivering it back. But, to give you an example kind of the stuff that I've been looking at, it's everything from small scale hydrogen to offshore wind to new battery technology, and then alongside that, it's not just engineering. So I mean, I spent an afternoon trying to get in contact and phone MPs in the south of England. I spent, you know, it's I suppose one of the merits of being involved in a smaller company at this stage is that, you know, you get to do really interesting different things and try out.
Okay, Tom, I want to pass the mic to Brian Doherty. Brian is our development manager and was a member of the first graduate intake program in electricity, if I recall. Yeah.
Yep, that's correct. I just finished 6 years of engineering in UCD. I did a degree and then a master's. And at the time, I was determined to go travelling for at least 3 years. And my father, not too happy with that, insisted I applied for a job. So I applied for a job I wouldn't get, which was the first graduate programme, and didn't get it, and was so irritated by that I rang HR for a chat, got an interview, and the rest is history. And had a great time. I spent 5 years in electricity and had a heap of different roles, a little bit of engineering obviously, but you know, everything from sending out invoices to customers, to talking to landowners in Tyrone, to, you know, surveying one of Ireland's first, or Ireland's only offshore wind farm down in Arklow. So, you know, very varied and great fun, and learned a lot in the process. And yeah, I don't know if you want me to continue or keep going.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, so electricity got sold. The guys started at Mainstream, which is, I suppose, a similar type of company. Joined that for a couple of years, and spent a year in South Africa running around with a jeep and a map trying to find sites down there, which was a wonderful opportunity to see a country and you know, develop some sites that are now fully operational wind farms. Spent a year in the UK bidding on large offshore projects in round 3 there with some success, and also in Scotland. And then at that stage I decided I had enough of development, so I jumped to the other side and joined Siemens, who are one of the big turbine manufacturers, sold turbines for a good few years. Took voluntary redundancy there when they realised they had too many salespeople. And now back in development when the guys started the company and got it off the ground. Torben, who I'd worked closely with in electricity, gave me a ring and asked me if I was doing anything, and I wasn't. So it was timely, and here we are.
Okay, and what would you say your time in Siemens added to your perspective back in a roller coaster developer?
Yeah, so there's obviously very different companies. I think you know, Mainstream and Electricity are relatively small companies. Obviously had grown to a reasonable size, but Siemens, when I joined, had 400,000 employees, so it's kind of a slightly different scale. And you know, there was a lot of good things about that. Like you know, like we could get a meeting any time. There was no problem. You know, you just call up and say Siemens would like to talk to you, and they say when. You know, so there was nice things like that. And if you needed somebody to do something, there was always some guy in Denmark whose speciality was that niche little thing that you needed. So it was great to have all the resources. There was always an engineer somewhere that could answer the question that you had. But you are pigeonholed into sort of one function or one role, whereas in a smaller company there's a lot more opportunity to do different things. You know, so you need to be a little bit more flexible, but you know, it's a great opportunity to try out different things. You know, whereas in bigger companies, you know, some people prefer it, and you're kind of stuck in one role that's a bit more stable, you could argue. So different. But
yeah.
The other big thing you realise when you're working in Siemens is that renewables is a global business. You know, you know, it's not a small cottage industry. It's not simply in Ireland or even in Europe. You know, Siemens is selling turbines all over the world, and you know what we're doing here fits into that. And often we're a leader in Ireland in renewables, and often there's things to learn from other jurisdictions as well.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point Brian makes, is that there are different types of organisations active in renewables. We, for example, are focused in the development space, but offshoots of utility companies such as SSE, Airtricity, or RWE, or Statkraft, these will have renewables businesses that are big businesses in their own right. They're more structured. They'll have a canteen, for example, in their office, and they'll have a different corporate atmosphere, which may suit people. There's no one size fits all here. But those who have lived hand to mouth in small businesses that may be interesting but are not financially stable will appreciate the benefits of big companies where you can go through a structured program. But it's really horses for courses. So it's just important to understand that there are those distinctions when you do your targeting. One of the main specialty areas that you might consider in a renewables development business is the process of developing projects. Surprise, surprise. And this, in my view, when I was doing offshore wind, is the concept, the thing to visualize is you're standing on the side of a windy hill trying to visualize a wind farm down the road. It's a little bit trickier offshore, I'd say. You need to be in a boat for starters, but most of that initial screening is on with maps. But Gareth is our Chief Development Officer, and he's going to be able to give you some glimpses into what's involved in that development process and what skill set might be brought to it or that. Gareth?
Thanks, Fintan. So just to follow the same sort of structure as the boys and girls have already followed. My background, I'm a chartered surveyor. Hope everyone can hear me, yeah? I'm a chartered surveyor. In a previous life where I would have been involved in the transactions of commercial investment properties, so everything from, say, office blocks to shopping centres to hotels, and I worked for a company called Knight Frank. Now, when you're involved in those type of transactions, clearly you're interacting with lawyers, you're interacting with the finance and banks and funding, but also you're interacting with the landowners of the actual properties themselves. So, as Fintan indicated, when you're developing projects, whether it be an offshore wind farm, a solar park, or an office block, you have to first of all sit down with the landowner to try and get an agreement with them that they're going to actually sell the land maybe to you, or even rent the land to you. So there's a negotiation process that has to take place for pretty much at the very start of the development phase itself. We have four things in the development process that we tend to really look at, which make up a project and make a project actually work. The first one is the securing of the land, or at least identifying the land that's going to be suitable to house the projects. So the filtration process that goes into actually identifying the land is extensive. A planner won't give you land or give you planning permission if you're going to be developing, for example, on land which is high quality grade, where farmers can grow the best crops, where there's an ancient monument sitting next door. So there's a lot of work that goes into actually identifying a parcel of land or a parcel of seabed to allow you to actually take it forward. The next thing you need here is you need a grid connection, which allows you, or as we have discovered quite recently, hydrogen's coming down the line, but grid connections generally tend to be the route of market. So if we can build the project, wind farms, solar farms, or other forms of generation, we need to be able to export that power to a grid system, a grid point, for it to be then transported along the grid into the grid infrastructure. The third point, as I say, is we've got the land, we've got the grid, and then we have to apply for a planning permission or a planning consent. The process, to give you a bit of an example, at the moment we're developing battery storage facilities in the UK, and we're generally working on a rule of thumb of a 6-month timeline from start to finish. What I mean by start, we mean compiling all of the survey works which are required. So everything from an LVIA, which we call a visual impact assessment, to ecology, to flood risk, to obviously the land qualification and the grading. I'll not bore you in terms of going through all of the list, but there's an extensive list of criteria that we have to satisfy before we take projects further into the development process. And then eventually, finally, as I said, we have an off-take, so we have to be able to either sell, we have to obviously be able to sell the electricity once we've generated it. And that's ultimately how the project will be able to stack up financially, because at the end of the day, these are large infrastructure projects, but they have to be able to stand on their own 2 feet in terms of the investment, the returns that they are able to be achieved with the projects, because as Fintan maybe will allude to later, the capital required to actually build these projects and to get them energized is substantial. These are highly intensive projects which require lots and lots of money from the start right through to see them through to energization. So in probably in terms of timeline, we're talking probably a 12, in some cases a 20-month period from start to finish, whenever we can actually walk off a site, it's actually fully energized and it's actually exporting power to the grid.
Okay. What about project management? Where does that fit into as a skill?
It's intense. So when we're talking about project management, in terms of, I would like to sit here and say I'm the only person who actually who actually runs and makes a project work in terms of the management. But Brian here sits to my left, and Tom sits to my left, and obviously Gina here is right as well. There's a huge team of people involved in actually the development of projects. External, first of all internal, okay, so Tom's ability to be able to maybe model solar resource or wind resource, or even contacting the local MPs, which I know he's been involved with, because we need to have the local stakeholders who are going to be affected, who live in these locations on our side as such, or at least to be well informed, so that they can actually make a decision that they're actually going to help us in the development process to back our projects. As in addition to that, we have external third-party advisors, providers of services that we have to obviously manage. And when I talk about third parties, I'm talking lawyers who, hopefully there's no legal team or lawyers in here, but lawyers are really great people, but they have an ability to be able to find lots and lots of risk, and they have an ability to be able to delay projects and getting them through the legal process. At the end of the day, they're looking to clearly protect us, but sometimes, as I say, sometimes we would like them to be a little bit correct, and they're costly. Sometimes we would like them to be a little bit more commercial in terms of their actual process, but that's what we're dealing with. We have grid consultants who we utilize externally. So we have one party in particular who helps us with our grid connection application work. So to apply to the grid, we have to submit applications, which can take up to 6 months from start to finish in terms of applying, getting your grid connection offers back, dissecting those offers, dealing with the DNOs, who are actually the distribution network operators. So in Ireland, the main DNO and only DNO is ESB. Whereas in the UK, for example, we're dealing with several DNOs. So for example, we've got SSE, we've got UKPN. So there's a range of different DNOs out there who are actually in charge of managing the local infrastructure network. So every day is different. Dealing with the parties, it's never a dull moment, put it like that, but you're dealing with different problems every day and dealing with different parties every day. So it's a challenge, but it's one I think which is worthwhile.
Okay, thanks, Gareth. I mean, one of the things Gareth has brought out there is that there's an ecosystem around companies like ours of support, various professional consulting disciplines feed in, because we need a specialist burst of work from them, but we don't have a constant stream of work. So we hire them as independent consultants. A bigger organization will have a constant stream of work across a bigger portfolio for these specialist skills. So it's possible for them to think in terms of having some of these skill sets in-house, or the professional disciplines. So one of the professional disciplines when we started Source Galileo was HR, and we engaged Gina, our next contributor, as an external HR consultant, which was a wonderfully flexible way for us to access top quality expertise, but not have to have a full-time overhead on our payroll. So,
but I managed to worm my way in. My background is probably, I'm a bit of a late bloomer to renewables, but I started off my career, well, for the last 20 years in HR. So I went to college to UCD, wanted to become a social worker, and found out very quickly in the first term that it was absolutely not what I wanted to do. After one placement with child addiction services, I came home and said, well, that's the end of that, but I still have another 3 years to go. So thankfully in your third year you can specialise in HR, because they say HR is the social work of the business world. So I ended up, I suppose, indirectly falling into HR, but loved it. And I spent, I suppose, the last 20 years in HR positions. So firstly with a consulting firm, so in kind of professional services, and I worked in kind of HR and change management roles, which were great. And then when I got married and had kids, I went out on my own and I worked as a HR consultant, as Fintan said, and one of my clients was a solar developer. And Fintan was actually on the board there, and I suppose that was my first insight into the world of renewables. And I have to say I was sort of hooked early on, just in terms of the energy and I suppose the potential within the industry. And then, as Fintan said, when Source was set up, I came in as a HR consultant. So Brian was the first employee. I was actually on my holidays down in Gorey in Wexford when I had my first call with Brian and Peter. But the beauty of Teams screens is you can have sort of a business-looking screen in the background. But I was only telling Torben yesterday, I was actually sitting in my car. So when we had our kind of contracts discussion, I was sitting outside our holiday home, which is the upside of being a consultant. You can be anywhere. But so I suppose over the last year and a half, I've helped with, I suppose, bringing the team on board and getting the right processes. So I suppose it's like the development of the company from an internal perspective, getting the right benefits in place and contracts and handbooks, and making sure there's sort of a performance management structure. And then last summer I joined, I packed in, following lots of different conversations with Fintan and Garrett and Torben and Kevin, and I joined in a permanent capacity as the COO. And I suppose my role now obviously includes HR, but takes on a more operational role. So making sure we have the right processes in place from a finance and an IT perspective, and dealing with our investors and sort of corporate affairs and terms of the likes of our press releases and things like that. So it's been really exciting. It's definitely been, I suppose, a pivot, but I suppose it's testament that it doesn't matter what your undergrad is or what the start of your career can be, there's always time to change, and I have to say I've loved the last 6 months. So.
Good. So what we've tried to showcase here is a glimpse of how you can get into renewables in a number of different ways. Some could be described as specialist. Others can be very mainstream, and I would describe those as not pejoratively, but like accounting, HR, IT. These are normal enough skill sets to have, and they're needed in renewables for exactly the same reason that they're needed in any business. That's the formal, let's call it, set piece part of this session. So we'll throw it open for any questions that have struck you or that you came prepared with.
We've actually one more slide, Fintan, sorry, that Brian is going to cover, just in terms of, I suppose, looking ahead, so what the future of the industry looks like. So Brian very kindly pulled the slide together earlier, and he probably needs to read it.
I'm just checking what I put on it. So, and the reason we're kind of laughing, this report came out 2 days ago. So, obviously use the MBA skills to quickly digest the complete thing and pull the salient points out of the first page. The purpose of the report is aimed at government, and it's telling them there's a huge opportunity here, and this is what you need to do to make the most of that opportunity. And really why I wanted to put a slide in this presentation and highlight it is because it emphasizes to this group how many opportunities there are here for you guys. You know, we have, I'm not sure the exact number of people working in the industry now, but I'd say it's less than 10,000. I'd guess it's probably 6, 7, 8,000, something like that. And you can see the pretty large numbers there by 2040. You know, if the government does everything in the report, there'd be 140,000 jobs. And the other thing about it is those jobs just aren't in, you know, you might have the impression they're all engineering jobs or corporate finance jobs. There's a broad range of jobs there. And some of them will be, you know, technicians and people who do apprenticeships, and, you know, there's probably not that many people who in this room would fit into that category, but there's a wide range of jobs across a bunch of different categories. The report's there, I think I put the link in it as well, so if anyone wants to have a flick through it, but the key point is there's heaps and heaps of jobs coming, lots and lots of money, and as well as being in an exciting, interesting place to work, you know, you'll find yourself with lots of career opportunities if you choose this sector.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I'd add to that is renewables jobs are as mobile as hairdressing. Okay, you can go anywhere in the world, and as long as you have your scissors or can borrow a scissors, you've got a revenue generating opportunity. Renewables, there's only one planet, there's only one ecosystem. It's all affected by the same thing. So have a renewable experience will travel. So there was a lady here, put the hand up with a question. I always think the first person to put the hand up is very brave.
You just got yourself a job.
How do we mitigate the risk before the critical milestones are achieved? Right.
Thank you. Good question, actually.
He's thinking.
I've never had to think about this before. What I mentioned before in terms of the filtration of actual sites, the process that goes in to identifying the sites is long. For example, we have 5 sites in Irish waters. And if you take a look at Irish waters, it's vast. But if you were to see the constraints mapping program that we followed with our external partners, service providers, you have everything in there from oil and gas pipelines to shipwrecks to shipping lanes to water depths, etc., that would prevent you from actually being able to actually construct certain projects in those areas. Once we've settled on those areas, then what we need to do then is actually embark on a program of bird and mammal survey work, for example, which potentially could be, a 2-year program. Now we all know birds migrate in the winter and come back in the summer, so we have to follow a pattern whereby we monitor for 6 months of the year birds, for example, for our offshore wind projects, and then that data is compiled, so we then are able to design the projects around certain flight paths, or we can actually then help mitigate certain, design sort of the projects around the ability to not harm those flight paths as such, because birds tend to fly in the same locations year on year on year, which is quite incredible. Once we actually are settled and we're actually confident in terms of we've selected the right sites, we've embarked on some of those extensive, when they are extensive in terms of cost survey works, we have a lot of lobbying to do. Clearly we have to follow government policy. We have a lot of lobbying to do with local stakeholders, with fisheries. So fishermen generally don't tend to like you going into their sea area, because they're saying, well, this is ours and we're fishing it. If we're prevented from going in such a location, that's going to affect our well-being and our income, so to speak. So we have, that's just the starting process, okay? Then we have to look and see how can we get the power as such back to shore, if we're bringing the power from such a project back to shore. And we have to then look at cable routes to the actual point of connection. So I mentioned earlier about planning for grid connection, points of connection. a substation where we can maybe connect some of these projects into might be sitting 50 miles inland. So we then have to look at what the corridor to bring a cable from the wind farm, which is 30 miles offshore, to our.
So what I think, Gareth, what Gareth is describing are some of the specific operational issues that have to be addressed. But if you to think about it in terms of a risk management framework, right, you're looking for the quickest indication and the cheapest route to get to finding the things that would kill a project before you've spent a lot of money on it. So you have a series of filters, and you're looking for the most detrimental possible scenarios to get that out of the way before you start spending more money on the next most critical thing that you want to get out of the way. So a series of filters, and then there's a governance process. So there'll always be each of these projects is in its own company typically. So each company has to go through an asset review process, which is very focused on the stage of the process that it's at. So then onshore projects tend to be smaller simply because there's so many people objecting to big ones, right? So 50, 100 megawatts is a good size for an onshore project. But offshore wind responds to economies of scale. So you're talking about a minimum of 500 megawatts to more likely something that can grow to 1.5 gigawatts. So you have a different risk-reward trade-off here, because it's more expensive to do projects right from the get-go in offshore wind. So you want to do a lot of desktop studies on maps to pick out the possibility of wrecks or anything that might interfere with the economics of a project down the line. So there's a trade-off. Yeah, it might be more expensive, but the prize is bigger, and that's where the right type of capital comes in. So you'll have some investors are happy with these small onshore ones where there's lots of small projects and they contain their maximum loss, okay? And then there's a completely different type of investor that wants the big stuff. So just a random fact, let's say some investment manager has raised 10 billion in its latest infrastructure fund, and they've allocated 5 billion to renewables. So if they're going to put 5 billion to work over their investment period, they have to get chunky projects. You can't be running around doing 200 small onshore ones if they could do 2 big offshore ones. So there's these trade-offs come in, and you feel your way to the sweet spot. Rather a long answer, I suppose, but it was a very good question, as Gareth said. Okay, we got one person on the back. What are the acoustics like in this? Could someone project the voice right from the back? We might find out.
Hi, thank you for the wonderful presentation. I'm Binyamin from India. I'm surprised to see there are not so much developments in offshore wind projects in India. So is that lack of the market reach, or is there some other constraints for not as developments in Asia and India?
So what explains the delay in offshore wind happening in the Irish market? Is that in India? In India?
Yeah. Like
right.
The development
right colour is wrong flag, right. Okay, India?
I'll maybe come in here as well. I'm sorry for being the only person, but it comes down to the actual programme of development, and generally the governments of the country need to set in place programmes to actually allow for the development of offshore wind. It may be down to, or maybe come down to the subsidy support regime that the country itself has to implement, which would then be used to support such projects. But I would imagine, and knowing what we know, I wouldn't say India is far behind in terms of the development of offshore wind. We believe, as I say, they are going to be introducing, if they haven't already done so, a programme for offshore wind along its western coast.
Brian, you seem to...
Well, I was going to make the
regulations are starting to become commercially available. So you may see policy development in India. It's not something that we've been looking at certainly in the last couple of years, but that may emerge in the next year or two as floating emissions become more available.
Yeah, so you've got a confluence of Indian policy making and need, and international capital being attracted into the marketplace because the regulatory framework enables things to happen. There's good economics. There's a feasible currency hedging approach would loom large, I think, in India, because I think there's still capital controls there. And all the time India will be getting compared with China, Vietnam, Philippines, Norway, Ireland, right? Capital is mobile, people are mobile, so every country is actually competing with other potential places that developers, turbine manufacturers may even prefer to supply to some countries rather than another. There's a whole mixture of reasons.
The question that here's
I'll get my steps
You should
in.
be able to project your voice from there. Yeah?
Oh, hello. This is Barat from Syria. I want to ask you guys about solar. I see you guys taking a step back towards solar. You were there, but you're not really there. And I see that wind is a big thing in Ireland, but it has a lot of issues. And as you were explaining, the risks and the factors that you guys have to take into considerations, it's a lot. Why aren't you guys taking a step forward into solar and making such big projects in solar as you guys are doing for wind and offshore?
Yeah, well, we do solar projects, but it's very much a sideshow for us. We can test hydrogen technology en route to market using a 50 megawatt solar project onshore in the UK. And we can do that ahead of when we bring on a 2 gigawatt floating offshore wind farm off Ireland or Norway. So it's a hydrogen industry, green hydrogen industry isn't in existence yet. There's demand for hydrogen, and hydrogen is a molecule that's the same regardless of how it's been produced. It ends up as the same molecule, but it has a dramatically different carbon footprint if it's coming from gas as its source rather than renewable energy. But for us, we're focused on floating offshore wind, and for us, solar is a complete, it's very useful, but it's a sideshow, right? So we believe we can make more of an impression on this challenge by doing a number of large-scale floating offshore winds than a whole necklace of solar projects. And there are people who specialize in that area, sure, and they're very good at it. So you kind of say, well, where's our competitive edge? Where are we taking up a position? Is there anything you want to add to that, Gareth?
I think you've summed it up pretty well. Just in terms of clearly, if we're looking to, say, replicate a gigawatt of solar and a gigawatt of wind, we need to find preferably one landowner who has 3,000 acres of land. And that is not easy in Ireland in particular. In the UK, probably maybe different, as I say, because there's such large landed estates. But the challenge of developing large-scale solar takes you into a totally different new planning regime, okay, from the local authority planning regime, which is a 12-month, 24-month process, of which you then have to go to the Secretary of State in the UK for your planning approval. As Fintan said, there's a few really well experienced developers in the space, and credit to them, as I say, because they have been successful. But in the comparison, there may only be about, I'd say, 10 projects, solar projects, which are classified as NSIP, National Significant Infrastructure Projects, that have been consented in the UK, and they're probably 250 megawatts, maximum 600 megawatts in scale and size. So you can see the challenges, and obviously the process is a lot different.
I'd add to that particularly with solar, you choose your market, right? You'll get more hours of sunshine in the Middle East and along the Maghreb, the north of Africa. A lot more hours out of a panel in those places. Spain has a lot of empty land, an amazing amount of empty land and a great solar resource, but it's a desperately difficult market if you're not Spanish. Right. There's loads of empty land in the States, and you can do solar there, but you have to have a way of working in the States that's better than the Americans who are already there. These kind of considerations crop up. So we're happy out on the water.
Yeah, I see. I come from the UAE and they're going crazy over solar, so I was weirded out when I came here. Yeah. And I saw how wind here is taking over the land and solar is not really looked at. But I want to ask you, you were talking about scissors and wherever you go, you can either bring them with you or borrow them. You guys didn't tell us about the supply chain of wind and how you guys work with that.
Well, one example of it is supply chain is a really tight thing. It's been disrupted in offshore wind because there was a lot of vicious competition in auctions which drove the price down and nearly bankrupted some of the turbine players. So that's getting a lot of that's working its way through. But one of the things we did as we considered how to be successful in floating offshore wind is we entered into a partnership with a technology company in Norway. And Norway are much more advanced than Ireland in this space. They already have their long-established demonstration projects for single turbines on a floating platform. But our partner is an outfit called Odfjell Engineering. Private, some of it's private, some of it's quoted. They've been making floating offshore platforms for oil and gas drilling rigs since the 70s in the harsh environment off the west coast of Norway. They specialize in the harsh environment. And the fundamental design of that platform, which can be out in 3 kilometers from mean wave height to seabed, and then they're drilling down another 3 kilometers, and then they're going horizontal, right? So you can imagine how important it is to stay in the same place. Right. So they've developed this technology, and it's a direct read across to the application of floating offshore wind platforms with an upside down Eiffel Tower stuck on the top. It's a direct read across. Now these guys, they design the platforms, they do the procurement, they supervise the manufacturing in a steel yard, which might be in Korea or it could be in Holland, wherever the procurement process delivers it, and they commission it, and then they operate and maintain it through their life. So these were the guys that suggested to us that we should have inside our tent, securing their production capacity and their expertise as we require these platforms, for floating offshore wind. And one of the projects that Gareth referred to there, the Goliath one, is these guys, their customers are the oil and gas industry, not just in Norway, but globally, right? And their customers want to have co-located green electricity available to their to their offshore infrastructure. Right? Okay, so we've got not a captive customer base, but our partner inside our tent has a load of customers that they've been supplying for 50 years, right? And will have contracts for the next 20 or 30 already on the table. And these guys need electricity, right? So that's one example of how we've taken a strategic approach to supply chain, right? And that they'll travel with us wherever our pipelines are. I'm happy to do it too.
Thank you for the informative presentation. My question might be very silly, but I just want to know, let's say the water is owned by the government in Ireland, so it's like, do you you started with the process, you finalize the site, then you just go there and start construction, or you take the permission of the government? And if there is you and another company that selected the same site, then which company will actually be building the?
You want to take that, Brian?
So I suppose to answer the first part of your question, seabed is owned by the state, and they will give you the right to use that, so you'll have to apply. If two people want to use the same piece of seabed, then you'll have some sort of competition. That could be price-based, so they'll ask what can you generate, what price can you generate power from on this site, and it's just pure, or it might be based on a combination of different things like price, your capability to deliver, and the progress you've made on developing the project so far. So the state will be looking for the least risk, best value option to select to build on that site. They'll give you a lease then when you're selected, and you'll pay them over the lifetime of the project. You'll pay them for the use of the seabed. So the state will benefit from both the energy and also the revenues from the lease over time. And every state is different, every country is different in terms of how they go about that. Generally speaking, that's the model.
Okay, it can be a bit nerve-wracking because there's quite a long gestation period in the development of an offshore wind farm, and sometimes public administration gets a brainwave and changes the rules. And that can be very nerve-wracking. Also, the economics can change, and they can change in your favor as well. But for example, the early Irish projects that have got through the gate into the next stage of development are built very close to shore, and they've been so long in development. I mean, we did Arklow Banks 21 years ago, and it's still the only one. And all of the other projects that were being developed around that time are still trying to get built. So they're built quite close to shore, and the turbines originally that they were conceived of using are no longer being made. The bigger ones are being made, which makes the prospect of getting planning permission for a near-shore offshore wind farm with a turbine twice the size of what was originally envisaged is not very good. And that's why we've chosen our sites out of sight. Out of sight is the place to be offshore.
Yeah.